Basic 2 unequal column layout. Generally, 2-column layout consists of a header, footer, and then 2 columns in the content area. One column is for the main content, while the other is a sidebar. Now let's jump to the code and explore some basic 2 unequal column layouts. For the basic 2 unequal column layout, I have opened a document type HTML. I open HTML, head, meta, and style. So remember, all this will be closed in the right order right at the bottom, except the HTML, which will be closed finally. As you can see, we have closed the style, we've closed the head, and we are now left with the HTML right at the bottom. Let's go back to the top. Right from the top, we declare a body selector where we're making use of the background color, padding left, and padding right. We also declare another selector for box sizing, which was called border box. And further down, we declare another selector called dot column. And within that, we had our float, we had our padding and height. And further down, we also declare another selector called dot left, where we had our width. Further down, we had another selector called dot right, where we had our width as well. And further down, we declared another selector called dot row after. This is where we have our mouse hovering over the text. And within the dot row after, we had the content, we had display and clear. And further down in the body, we had a topic. We are making use of the row. We are making use of the column left and giving it a style. We had another topic with the styles and the text content. And we had a paragraph. And we had some text. And we closed that div. As you can see, we closed that div. And again, we open another div where we're making use. Okay, let me just highlight the second div. We open the second div where we're making use of our column right. Remember over here, we made use of our column left, and now we're making use of our column right. Again, we assign the style and the text content. And we had another paragraph right below it, and we assign it some text. So let's have a look at the HTML page to see how it looks like. So this is how the 2 unequal column layout looks like. It is unequal because the first part is smaller and the second part is wider. So within the body, remember we had our topic to be 2 unequal columns. And on the first class that we used, we had this content. And on the second class, we had this content. We can go back to the code and make some changes, probably to the background color or even text within the container. Okay, let's jump back to the code and make some changes. Maybe we can change column 1 to column 001. Okay, I've just changed that. And we can also change column 2 to column 0002. Let's save the file and jump back to the page. On refreshing the page, you can see the changes has been made. So you can change anything just as you want it. Now let's jump back to the code and see what else we can change. Let's try to change the padding on the column left. Okay, the padding on the column left originally was 10 pixels. Let's give it 100 pixels. I'm going to save the file and jump back to the page. Remember, it's the padding on the left. We're changing to 100 pixels. So let's refresh the page. Now we've refreshed the page and it has pushed this away from its position. Okay, let's go back to the code and make some more changes. Let's try 80 pixels or let's try 50 pixels. I'm saving the file and jumping back to the HTML page. I'm going to refresh the page and this is 50 pixels padding. But let's jump back to the code and see what other changes we can make. At the moment, the height is 300 pixels and we're changing the padding back to 40 and the height now is 100. Let's save the file and jump back to the HTML page and see how it looks like. Now, as we have changed the height to 100, it actually left the text outside of the box. Let's jump back to the code and correct that. So let's give it 300 pixels again. I'm saving this file and jumping back to the page. I'm going to refresh the page. Now it has come back to normal. In this example, we will create a 4-column layout that will transform to 2 columns on screens that are less than 900 pixels wide. However, on screens that are less than 600 pixels wide, the columns will stack on top of each other instead of floating next to each other. Let's jump to the code and explore some mixed column layouts. Here we are at the page Mixed Column Layout. Right from the top, we declared a document type HTML, and we open the HTML, we open the head, the meta, and the style. So within the style, which is this, so within the style, we had everything we needed to declare within the style, such as background color, padding left, padding right, box sizing, float, width, padding, and content display clear. We also had a media screen where we set the max width to 900 pixels. We declared a dot column here with a width of 50% and another dot column with a width of 100%. And right within the body, we had our topic, mixed column layout. We had a paragraph, and under that, we declared a div class where we made use of row right from top, another div class for the column and the style and the text content. We had a paragraph and we closed the div. So this is one div. This is another div, making 2. This is another div, making 3. This is another div, making 4. So right within the body, we declared 4 div sections. Now let's have a look at the HTML page to see the 4 div sections. Here we are at the HTML page. We have the 1 div, 2 div, 3 div, 4 divs. We had a topic, we have the paragraph right under the topic, which is mixed column layout. I'm just going to zoom in and out for you to see the differences. So right now, all the divs are lining up horizontally. So I can still zoom out further so you can see how it looks like. But when I zoom back in, the divs now begin to stack on top of each other. You can see. So it was stacking on top. The more I zoom out, the more it jumps out from underneath and stay on the side, making it just one row of divs. Vertical navigation with unordered list. As you can see from the slide, this is a good example of a vertical navigation with unordered lists. So let's jump to the code and explore a vertical navigation with unordered list. Okay, for the vertical navigation with an unordered list, we've created a page and we're having a document type HTML. So we open HTML, head, and style. So within the style, we have our body selector declared. So within this body selector, we made use of our background color, a padding left, which is 50 pixels, and padding right, 50 pixels. We open an unordered list over here, and our list style type, we gave it none. Our margin is 0, our padding is 0, our width is 200 pixels, while our background color is these values. And beneath that, we had a list A. And within the list A, We had our display and the value is block. We had a color and its value. We had a padding set to 8 pixels and 16 pixels. We had a text decoration set to none. We had a background color set to these color values. And further down, we had a list A hover. This helps the color to change whenever we hover over the box. I'll show it to you in the HTML page. Okay, let's jump to the HTML page to see how that feels. Here on the HTML page, whenever I move my mouse over the box, it actually changes the color of the box. You can see how it changes the color. That's the effect. Let's jump back to the code and see if we can make some changes to this. So that's the list A hover. That's what it does. So the background color is this and the color itself is this. So further down, let's go into the body and see what we can change. We had our topic, vertical navigation bar. Within that, we made some references. Reference to the home button, reference to the news button, reference to the contact button, and reference to the about button. So whenever we make reference to this button, it will take us to the destination, but at this point, we're not looking at the destination, we're only looking at the vertical aspect of navigation with an unordered list. Horizontal navigation with an unordered list. Looking into the slide, we can see a horizontal version of our unordered list navigation. This appears horizontal while the previous appears vertical. So let's jump into the code and make some changes. So here we are in the horizontal navigation with unordered list page. So right from top, we've declared a document type HTML. We open the HTML, the head, and the style. So within the style, we had a body selector where we declared our background color, our padding left, and padding right. We had our unordered list where we declared our list style type, margin, padding, overflow, which is hidden, and we also had our background color to these color values. And further down, we had a list selector where we declared its float to be left and its border right, we gave it 1 pixel with the solid color of this value. And further down, where we declare its border right as none. Further down, we had a list A where we declared its display to be block and we gave it these color values, its text align, its center, its padding is 14 and 16 pixels, and text decoration is none. And further down, we had a dot active selector where we declared a background color. And finally, we had our list A hover where we declare its background color to be these values and its color is this value. So finally, we close the style. So right from top, we had a style open all the way to this point. So within the style, we declared everything we want to see happen in the body. So let's go right into the body and see what we want to see. Right within the body, we opened an unordered list. So what do we have in the list? We had an active class and we're referencing into the home button, and another list is reference to the news, another list is reference to the contact, and we had a style that is float right and we reference that to the about. So which means the about button will be floated to the right side of the page. So the home button, news button, and contact button do not have any style. They are staying in their original position except the about button, which will be floated to the right position. Now let's have a look at the HTML page. Looking at the HTML page, we can see the home at the original position, the news at the original position, the contact at the original position, because they do not have any style attached to them except the about button. The about button has an attachment that floated it to the right position of the page. Display property. The display CSS property sets whether an element is treated as a block or inline element, and the layout used for its children such as flow layout, grid or flex. Formally, the display property sets an element's inner and outer display types. It also configures how and if an element is displayed. Take for instance, for display none, the element will not be displayed. For display block, the element is rendered as a block element even if it is actually an inline element such as a hyperlink. For display inline, the element will be rendered as an inline element even if it is actually a block element such as a list. CSS pseudoclasses. A pseudoclass is used to define a special state of an element. It is a keyword added to a selector that specifies a special state of the selected element. For example, the pseudoclass hover can be used to select a button when a user's pointer hovers over the button, and this selected button can then be styled. Let's have a look at some of the pseudoclasses and their anchor elements. Link is a default state for a hyperlink. Visited is a hyperlink that has been visited. Focus is triggered when the hyperlink has focus. Hover is triggered when the mouse moves over the hyperlink. And active is triggered when the hyperlink is being clicked. CSS pseudoclasses are used to add style to selectors, but only when those selectors are in specific state and meet certain conditions. Example, they are the first element of their type or they are being hovered over by the mouse pointer. A pseudoclass is expressed by adding a colon after a selector in CSS, followed by a pseudoclass such as hover, focus, or active. CSS styling for print. CSS is the print style sheet, and the media print command means that this CSS file only gets called up when web pages are printed. There are many different media you can use for style sheets, such as for handheld, TV, projection, and so on. The media CSS at rule can be used to apply part of a style sheet based on the result of one or more media queries. With it, you can specify a media query and a block of CSS to apply to the document if the media query matches the device on which the content is being used. Firstly, create an external style sheet with the configurations for browser display and create a second external style sheet with the configurations for printing. Finally, connect both the external style sheets to the web page using the two link elements as shown below. Print styling best practices. Some of the best practices for printing style sheets are to ensure you use dark text on a white background, to consider using a serif font which may be easier to read, to adjust the text size to 12 point or higher, and finally to modify paddings and margins where necessary. Standard cm, mm, or in units may be more practical. Let's see some examples of print styling. 1. In order to hide non-essential content, we make use of nav in brackets and its display will be none. Secondly, in order to configure font size and color for printing, we make use of point font sizes with dark text colors. And thirdly, in order to control page breaks, we use the dot new page, and in brackets, we assign always to page break before. CSS sprites. A CSS image sprite is a collection of small graphics that are combined into a single file that can be accessed by an HTML document. It saves download time because the web pages with many images can take a long time to load and generate multiple servers. These images are then referenced to the HTML code and displayed on the website. Position property. The CSS position property specifies where an element in the document should be placed. This property, in conjunction with the left, right, top, bottom, and z-index properties, determines an element's final position on a page. For example, when a position is static, the element's default value is rendered in normal flow. When a position is set to fixed, it specifies the location on an element within the browser viewport. As a result, the element will not move when the page is scrolled. When the position property is set to relative, it configures an element's location relative to where it would otherwise render in normal flow. When a position is set to sticky, it combines features of relative and fixed positioning that are not supported by Internet Explorer. Finally, when a position is set to absolute, it precisely configures the location of an element outside of normal flow. Fixed positioning. An element with position fixed is positioned relative to the viewport, which means it always stays in the same place even if the page is scrolled. The position property can take one of the several values, such as static, relative, fixed, absolute, and sticky. The top, right, bottom, and left properties are used to position the element. A fixed element does not leave an empty space on the page where it would normally be. Looking at the navigation example on the slide, we set the position to fixed. When a position is relative, it changes the position of the element relative to the parent element and relative to itself and where it would usually be in the regular document flow of the page. This means that it's relative to its original position within the parent element. Sticky positioning. An element with position sticky is positioned based on the user's scroll position. A sticky element toggles between relative and fixed depending on the scroll position. It is positioned relative until a given offset position is met in the viewport. Then it sticks in place like position fixed. Sticky positionings combine features of relative and fixed positioning. When element is rendered in normal flow and when reached during scrolling, it sticks to the specified position and remains there. Absolute positioning. An absolute position element is an element whose computed position value is absolute or fixed. The top, right, bottom, and left properties specify offsets from the edges of the element's containing block. The containing block is the ancestor relative to which the element is positioned. It precisely specifies the location of an element outside of normal flow in relation to its first parent non-static element. Stacking order with Z-index property. The Z-index property in CSS controls the vertical stacking order of elements that overlap, as in which one appears as if it is physically closer to you. Z-index only affects elements that have a position value other than static. An element with greater stack order is always in front of an element with a lower stack order. Stacking order with the Z-index property configures a third dimension. When the stacking order of position elements defaults, Z-index is 0. Elements with higher Z-index values will stack on top of elements with lower Z-index values. For a fixed position navigation bar, a fixed value is assigned to its position where its top is set to 0 and left is set to 0. And left is set to 0 as shown in this example. Fragment identifier. A fragment identifier is a short string of characters that refers to a resource that is subordinate to another primary resource. The primary resource is identified by a uniform resource identifier, and the fragment identifier points to the subordinate resource. The fragment identifier introduced by a hash mark is the optional last part of a URL for a document. It is typically used to identify a portion of that document. The generic syntax is specified in the RFC 3986. And lastly, fragment identifier allows you to identify a specific part of a web page. Skip to content. Skip to content offers a skip to content button that allows users to skip all the navigation items and jump straight to the main content. Since a point and click user doesn't need it, a skip to main content link is usually hidden and made visible when it is in focus. A skip to content link is an ordinary link, usually before the main navigation menu at the top, linking to the main content on the web page. When the user activates the skip to content link, the browser shifts the display. A single page website in HTML is a single very long page that its navigation area is clearly defined and its link navigates to specific sections that function as a page. Hyperlinks are methods of fragmenting identifiers. Content on a single page website is fully loaded on the first page, making the user's experience more seamless and fluid. Parallax scrolling. Parallax scrolling page layout is a page layout technique in which the background images scrolls faster than the text content. It is frequently accomplished using JavaScript and advanced CSS. It includes fundamental implementations such as the CSS background attachment property and background attachment in a fixed position. CSS debugging tips. Using the W3C CSS validator, you can manually check the link provided on the slide for syntax errors. Additionally, you can configure temporary background colors, temporary borders, and CSS comments to find unexpected elements using backslash, then asterisk, and text content in the middle, then backslash, then asterisk. Be patient and don't expect your pages to look exactly the same in every browser. Chapter 7 Summary. In this 7th chapter, we examine page layout basics, taken from our main topic, Basics of Web Design. This chapter expanded your CSS skill set. You configured web pages with floating elements with CSS. You were introduced to fixed, relative, sticky, and absolute positioning. You configured web pages with 2-column page layouts. You used unordered lists to provide structure for navigation hyperlinks. You added interactivity to hyperlinks with CSS pseudo-classes, and you applied new HTML and CSS coding techniques to configure a single-page website. In Summary Chapter 7, we examine the followings. We examine normal flow, float property, clear property, overflow property, the CSS box sizing property, basic 2-column layout, vertical navigation with unordered list, display property, horizontal navigation with unordered list, CSS pseudo-classes, CSS styling for print, print styling best practices, CSS sprites, position property, fixed positioning, relative positioning, sticky positioning, absolute positioning, stacking order with z-index property, fragment identifier, skip to content, single page website, parallax scrolling, and finally CSS debugging tips. We have now come to the end of the 7th chapter of Basics of Web Design. Thank you all for your attendance.